Lebanon or elsewhere in the region?
We have been very clear for some time now that U.S. citizens should avail themselves of commercial means to depart Lebanon, given everything that's going on. We have said that from this podium, from multiple podiums. We continue to say that, but we have not begun triggering a non-combatant emergency evacuation, a NEO, and do not have an intention to do so at this time. If that changes, we'll let you know. But we continue to reinforce the point. American citizens in Lebanon should follow, which is to find civilian commercial means to depart, because in extremis, we may not be able to get them out safely. Yes.
Thanks, Jake. What is the U.S. view on whether Israel should retaliate, and what is your concern about this leading to a wider escalation of war in the region?
We've had some initial discussions with the Israelis in the aftermath of this at the military level and also at the White House to Prime Minister's office level. We'll continue those conversations in the hours ahead. I'm not going to prejudge or get ahead of anything. We want to have some deep consultations with the Israelis, and I'll have more to report to you after we get the opportunity for deeper discussions.
And escalation in the region?
Obviously, this is a significant escalation by Iran, a significant event, and it is equally significant that we were able to step up with Israel and create a situation in which no one was killed in this attack in Israel, so far as we know at this time. We are now going to look at what the appropriate next steps are to secure, first and foremost, American interests, and then to promote stability to the maximum extent possible as we go forward. Yeah.
Back in April, the president's message to Israel was to take the win when the U.S. and Israel were able to intercept the barrage of Iranian missiles. Is he recommending a similarly limited response this time?
I will not, from this podium, share the president's recommendations. He will have the opportunity to share them directly. We're going to have, as I said, ongoing consultations with the Israelis this afternoon, this evening. It is too early for me to tell you anything publicly in terms of our assessment or in terms of what our expectations are of the Israelis or the advice that we will give them.
So will he be speaking to Prime Minister Netanyahu today?
I don't have anything to announce from this podium, but I can tell you that he is tracking this minute by minute. We are very much deeply in touch with the Israelis, and insofar as we have calls to read out, we'll make sure to read them out with you. Just last question, then I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Jake. In April, after Iran struck Israel, the U.S. issued a number of sanctions as a consequence. This morning, the president said there would be severe consequences if Iran carried out this attack. What are those consequences, and are they more severe than sanctions?
Totally legitimate question, and that answer will come based on the conversations and consultations we have with our Israeli counterparts. It's too soon for me to stand before you today and give you an answer. What I can tell you is this. We are proud of the actions that we've taken alongside Israel to protect and defend Israel. We have made clear that there will be consequences, severe consequences for this attack, and we will work with Israel to make that the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jake. Okay, on to the rest of the programming here. This morning, President Biden was briefed by his Homeland Security Advisor, Liz Sherwood-Randall, on the latest impacts of Hurricane Helene, and this afternoon he will receive an interagency briefing on the Hurricane Helene response and recovery efforts. At the president's direction, the Biden-Harris administration continues to use every tool available to get assistance and resources to the communities that need them the most. Yesterday, the president approved a major disaster declaration for Georgia, which will unlock additional assistance to help those recovering. This is in addition to the major disaster declaration swiftly approved by the president following requests from North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida, as well as requests for emergency assistance across 7 states. Tomorrow, the president will travel to Raleigh, North Carolina, where he will visit the State Emergency Operations Center to meet with local officials and also first responders. And the vice president will travel to Augusta, Georgia tomorrow, and will then head to North Carolina in the coming days. As of today, thousands of personnel from across the federal workforce are deployed in supporting state-led Hurricane Helene response efforts across the 6 affected states, including over 1,200 personnel in North Carolina. Still, there is more work to be done, and the Biden-Harris administration will be there for these communities every step of the way. Now, as you can see, we also have Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas.
Thank you, Corinne, and good afternoon. Before standing at the podium, I was at FEMA's National Operations Center being briefed by our personnel as well as state emergency personnel. I thought it very moving and very telling that North Carolina's emergency management director described Hurricane Helene as catastrophic and noted the fact that numerous towns situated along the river had virtually disappeared, had been completely destroyed. In fact, Hurricane Helene is of an historic magnitude. This many states hit this hard. The wind field of the hurricane stretched 350 miles from its center. More than 100 fatalities have been reported, hundreds and hundreds of homes and businesses destroyed. Our hearts break for those who have lost loved ones, and we pray for the swift assistance and rescue of those who are currently missing. We are in different phases of a post-hurricane environment depending on the state and the location within the state. In some areas, we are still in search and recovery, search and rescue operations. In others, we are in fact in the response and recovery phase. I thought I would give you some of the latest statistics based on the briefing that I received. And I should say that these numbers are, as you can all well understand, quite dynamic and fluid. They change minute by minute and hour by hour. But just as devastating as the hurricane has been, the response of federal, state, and local authorities has been extraordinary. We have more than 2,000 federal personnel dedicated to this effort. On the ground, we have more than 1,200 urban search and rescue personnel. FEMA staff deployed, over 1,200. Corinne mentioned the major disaster declarations and the emergency declarations previously issued. I should note that in the 6 states most severely impacted, the emergency declarations were issued before the storm hit, and we had thousands of personnel dedicated there. We have delivered more than 2.6 million ready-to-eat meals and more than 1 million liters of water. At its peak, there were 5.1 million customers without power. We have reduced that amount, and not just the federal government in support of the state and local authorities, but working very closely with the power companies and the other utilities. We've reduced that number of customers without power by 3.8 million people. And so the operation is very, very significantly underway. We are working in support of our state and local partners. This is an all of government, frankly, all of community effort. And with that, I'll take some questions.
With regards to how many were unaccounted for, yesterday Liz said about 600 were unaccounted for. Do you have an updated number on that?
We do not have an update, but that work is still underway. And I know, for example, within the Department of Homeland Security, the Coast Guard has recently rescued approximately 21 people through their patrols.
And there was also discussion yesterday on whether resources may have been better pre-positioned in other parts of the country. There were many assets in the Big Bend region of Florida, some in North Carolina, but should the government have pre-positioned more in the North Carolina area?
Well, we actually pre-positioned our personnel, and state and local personnel were pre-positioned in all 6 of the most heavily impacted states. This is an historic hurricane. It reached not only industrial areas, but of course, as we also poignantly see, rural areas as well.
Yeah, thanks, Corinne. Liz yesterday, focusing on the pre-positioning here before the storm, said that it was focused on the Big Bend region of Florida. So what pre-positioning was taking place there that wasn't taking place in the North Carolina, Western North Carolina area?
Remember that the pre-positioning of assets, to include personnel as well as equipment and the like, also depends on the terrain and the access points. And so we pre-position where we think the impacts are going to be greatest. And we have seen the impacts hit mountainous regions that are inaccessible. We now have roads destroyed. There is a significant amount of mud. We understand that people are still situated in the mud, and therefore we cannot undertake debris removal until we are assured that the search and rescue operation has been completed. We have to be very careful about the lives that still can be saved.
Well, what sorts of things were done in North Carolina before the storm came? Like, what was the federal presence there, emergency-wise?
I don't have the specific numbers of the personnel already situated, but we can get you that data.
Thank you, Corinne. Thank you, Secretary. Despite all the proactive things that the federal government did and its response, the sentiment, according to my colleagues on the ground from people, is that the federal government is not doing enough to help. Where are they? Where is the help? What is your message to those people?
I would say the following, that we are there and we will continue to be there, and we will reach the most difficult to access locations. We are relentless in our efforts to ensure the safety and security of all. And as Corinne pointed out, we will be there for the long haul as well. And I must pay tribute to the heroic men and women, not only of the Federal Emergency Management Administration, but throughout the federal government and throughout the state and local enterprise.
Thank you, Secretary, for talking about electric power. I'm curious about the status of cell phone service, as the Associated Press is hearing reports that people are having a tough time using their cell phones, being able to make calls, even reach you.
Yes.
What are you doing, and what is the status of that right now?
In fact, communication has been difficult in a number of areas, if not impossible. A great deal of infrastructure has been demolished. We are working with the private communications companies as well as the FCC to ensure that we can rebuild communication towers. We have, for example, deployed 50 Starlink satellite systems to help with the reconstruction of that infrastructure.
You mentioned that there are roads that have been destroyed. There are places that are so hard hit that it's hard to get to them right now. The president mentioned land bridges yesterday and working with the Defense Department. Can you talk about what the effort is right now to get to some of those hard hit areas and what the timeline is looking like to reach the people that are in need there right now?
So this is at the president and vice president's direction, an all of government effort. So it's not only by land, but we have deployed air assets. The Department of Defense has been of extraordinary assistance. I don't recall exactly the number of Army Corps of Engineers that have been deployed. I think it's close to 6,000. So it's an all of government effort to reach individuals, not just by land, but by air as well.
And how quickly do you anticipate getting to some of those areas that have been cut off because of the roads being flooded?
As quickly as we can.
Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you, Corinne. Mr. Secretary, do you have a sense of how much money it's going to cost, A, to do this relief effort, and B, to do the rebuild effort once we get there, and how much of that will be covered by insurance companies and how much will be covered by the government?
So this is a multi-billion-dollar undertaking. In terms of the search and rescue and the response, I should note that we already have approved approximately $1.7 million in individual assistance that individuals will be able to access. I believe it'll be as early as tomorrow. It is a direct deposit into their accounts. But the rebuilding is something that is not for today, but that is going to be extraordinarily costly and is going to be a multi-year enterprise.
All right, we were just listening into that White House press briefing where they were mostly talking about Hurricane Helene and the aftermath. But now we do want to jump over to the State Department as that update is getting underway right now.
And other members of the President's National Security Team in monitoring this attack as it was unfolding, as well as our response. As the President has made clear, our support for Israel's security is ironclad. We will continue to stand with the people of Israel at this critical moment. With that, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. So I think this probably goes without saying, but just to make sure we get on the record. So in terms of what happened in Israel, there no damage to any U.S. facilities, no injuries, no nothing.
At this time, we are not aware of any damage to U.S. facilities. As you know, we issued an order earlier today for our personnel, State Department personnel in Israel to shelter at their homes. We have full accountability for all our personnel. We're not aware of any civilian casualties inside Israel, let alone an American citizen casualty. There is one report of a Palestinian who died in the West Bank, but no damage to any U.S. facility either.
And then both you and the National Security Advisor just a few minutes ago talked about this being a brazen and unacceptable escalation. But does the administration see anything that Israel has done over the course of the last 3 weeks as escalatory?
So certainly they have done things to expand the conflict. But if you look at the actions that they have taken, they were bringing terrorists to justice, terrorists who have launched attacks on Israeli civilians. If you look at what Iran did today, we have been warning for some time about the threat posed by Iran arming and funding terrorist groups across the Middle East, and the attack today just demonstrated the danger of those actions. What you saw was Iran launching a state-on-state attack to protect and defend the terrorist groups that it has built, nurtured, and that it controls. So there is a difference between the actions that we have seen Israel take to defend its civilians and what we've seen Iran take.
I'm not trying to suggest that they are equivalent. I just wanted to make sure that you didn't see.
No, we have certainly seen we've certainly seen Israel expand the nature of its attacks against Hezbollah, but it is a very different type of attack than what we saw today from a state actor against another state.
Okay, and then last one, and this has to do with Lebanon and the northern front. The situation there is, unstable and uncertain. I know that you guys have been asking Americans who might want information about assistance and possibly leaving to sign up on a form. Can you give us an update on the numbers of those and whether or not you're planning to I don't know, to do anything in the way of either U.S. government capabilities or charter flights or ferries?
Sure. So you're right. As we often do in these situations, we have directed U.S. citizens who are in Lebanon to register with the State Department for information, and especially for information with how to depart Lebanon, and we're providing them whatever information we can. We have had, as of today, around 6,000 American citizens in Lebanon who have registered with us for further information. Should be clear, not all of those American citizens are seeking assistance with departing. People are just looking for information. They're looking for options. There are a number of American citizens who live in Lebanon who have lived there for years and do not want to depart the country. So in terms of the status on the ground, the airport is still open. Commercial flights are operating, although they are available at times at reduced capacity. We are working right now with airlines to provide additional flights with more seats for American citizens. It's something that we hope to turn on in the next few days, and we will be in touch with American citizens if and when we're able to expand that capability.
How do you ensure that there are going to be seats reserved for Americans?
Now, we're working with, I can't get into the details, but we're working with commercial carriers to ensure that capability. And when we have further information and we've locked this down, it's something we'll communicate directly with American citizens who've asked for information, and then I'll be happy to come and talk about it here at the briefing room.
Thanks.
Yeah, Jim.
So given that the Secretary and the National Security Advisor just said that this attack by Iran is sort of definitively escalatory in nature. I know that you've been telling us, the Secretary even told us that for months you've been encouraging the Israelis not to respond to attacks and provocations in such a way that escalates anything further. Or is the Secretary going to continue to offer that same advice to the Israelis now in the wake of these missile strikes?
I'll say a couple things about that. First, of course, Israel has the right to defend itself, as any nation does. In terms of what Israel's response will be, of course, there must be consequences for Iran for this attack. We've made clear that there must be consequences. I'm not going to get into what those consequences are today, but there are things on which we will be coordinating with our Israeli counterparts. And I think in the immediate aftermath of this attack, we are going to coordinate with them on what any response might be. I think it's important that we are able to defeat this attack through successful work with Israel and with our partners, and we will work with them on what a response might look like, but I'm not at the position just 2.5 hours after this event occurred to offer what that might look like today.
The Iranian foreign ministry people have said that now that they gave the U.S., I don't know who, a heads up in advance of these missile strikes today through diplomatic channels. Is that true?
That is absolutely false. We had no kind of warning from the government of Iran that they were going to launch such an attack. Yeah.
Given, you're not going to detail what the consequences are going to look like yet, understandably you guys are in conversations with the Israelis about that. Can you give us a sense for how U.S. officials are thinking about this right now in terms of magnitude of a response? Will it be more severe than the U.S. response to the Iranian attack on Israel in April, given your...
So I think it's too early to get into what the response might be. As I said, we're just a couple hours after this event having occurred. It's important that all of us inside the United States be able to take stock of the attack, be able to take stock of what occurred. As I said, there are initial assessments, but we need time to collect all of the information. And then we need time to talk with our Israeli counterparts, and we need time to talk to other partners in the region about the way forward. And we'll do that over the coming days. But it is clear that this was once again a significant escalation by Iran. When you see Iran launching attacks on another state, ultimately to come to the defense of a terrorist organization. It is an escalation, and Israel has the right to defend itself, but we will coordinate with them on what any response looks like.
How much more worried are you about a regional war today than you were in previous days before this attack occurred?
So I've gotten that question a number of times over the past year, and I never want to try and calibrate our level of concern, only to say, or other than to say, that preventing the outbreak of a full-scale regional conflagration has been one of our priorities since October 7th. It's something that we immediately identified was a risk after Hamas launched its brutal attacks on Israel, and something that we have been working to prevent. There have been a number of times in the past 12 months where it looked like we might reach such a conflagration. April 13th is one of them, quite obviously. And the United States, through a combination of deterrence and diplomacy, has been able to prevent such an outbreak of full-scale war. And we will continue to try and prevent an outbreak of full-scale war in the days and weeks ahead.
Just a few more questions. Is Iran's nuclear program a legitimate target for an Israeli response?
Again, I don't want to get into, and this is not to say that I'm ruling anything out and that I'm ruling anything in, but I would answer any question this way, which is, we want to have these conversations directly with our Israeli counterparts over the coming days. It's clear that this was an unacceptable attack, and as we made clear before this attack, there will be consequences for it, but I think it's appropriate that we discuss those consequences with our Israeli counterparts before we talk about them publicly.
Any other countries involved in defending Israel alongside the United States?
There were partners, as I said in my opening comments, who assisted in the defense of Israel. I will let all of those partners speak to their own actions.
And last question, is the attack over as far as the U.S. assessment is concerned?
Certainly this initial wave of an attack is over, which is not to say that there are other waves coming, or that there, is not to say that there are other waves coming. We saw an initial attack earlier today against the state of Israel. Certainly it would be incredibly reckless and would continue to be escalatory were Iran to launch further attacks on Israel, and we'll be monitoring in the hours ahead. Yeah.
There have been a lot of parallels drawn between Iran's attacks on Israel we saw in April and what happened today. The big difference is that back in the spring, Iran did message for weeks the kind of attack it was going to carry out against Israel, as opposed to this time around. It seemed to be very sudden by comparison. That lack of warning, public messaging, do you read into that? Is there any diplomatic significance?
I don't want to try to make assessments about why Iran made the decisions it made, or why it kind of telegraphed them publicly last time and didn't do so this time. Obviously, we had some indication that an attack might be in the works. You saw us talking about that. We made clear, we gave warnings to our Israeli counterparts about it earlier today, and I think they came and read out some of those conversations publicly. So we had indications that there may be some such attack. I can't speak to why they made the decision to not telegraph it as publicly as they did last time. It doesn't change the fundamental nature of the attacks, which is that this was an unacceptable and brazen action by the state of Iran.
I know you want to have conversations with your Israeli counterparts about what their response will be, but can you say anything about, are the discussions happening now? Have Israeli officials laid out any potential options for retaliation?
There are discussions that are ongoing. There were discussions that were happening between the United States and Israel as the attacks were unfolding. There were discussions that were happening from officials in this building, officials in the White House, and I won't speak to the Pentagon, but I would assume by officials at the Pentagon in the immediate aftermath of the attacks just in the last couple of hours, and those conversations will continue through the rest of the day and, of course, in the days to come.
Thank you. Matt, did the U.S. have any indication whether or not they were successful that the Iranians intended to strike U.S. interests or assets in the region?
I'm going to defer to the Pentagon to speak to specific operational details as to what the Iranians might have been targeting. They're obviously in the best position to monitor that and to speak to it. And I know they're having a briefing later today. I'll defer that question to them.
Okay. I mean, we understand that the embassy had all of its employees go home and shelter in place. Just want to confirm
that was out of an abundance of caution, knowing that an attack on Tel Aviv might be in the works, and so we took that step out of Tel Aviv and potentially Jerusalem as well. So we took that step out of an abundance of caution. But in terms of what specific sites Iran was targeting, I will defer to my colleagues at the Pentagon.
Okay. In terms of the partners that you mentioned were engaged this time, without getting into specifics as to who it was, were there fewer partners? Was there less support for their engagement this time around?
I think that's still a specific. Maybe it's a generality. Either way, I'm just not going to get into it other than say that there were partners that were engaged with us in this defense of Israel, and I will let every country speak to their own participation.
Okay, it's not a specific. It's just, I mean,
it's more specific than I'm willing to share at this point.
And just to clarify, I understand consultations are ongoing with the Israelis. What does the U.S. believe is the right course of action now, a response or diplomacy?
So again, I think it is important that we have those conversations with Israel before we read them out publicly. Obviously, we do not want to see this conflict continue to escalate. That said, we have been clear that there must be consequences for this attack, and I think it's important that we discuss this issue privately with our partners before we read them out publicly.
Okay, and in previous instances, it had become known that that part of the way, as you mentioned, the U.S. deterred Iran from taking action was through diplomacy, including the pushing of the potential of ceasefire talks, a potential breakthrough in Gaza. That seems remote now. What is the status of ceasefire talks,
either in Gaza or in Lebanon, that the U.S. had been pushing in the weeks prior to these developments?
It's a really good question, and I will say, I went into some of this detail here yesterday. Where we are on the ceasefire talks in Gaza is that the terrorist group that Iran funds, Hamas, has been unwilling to come to the table to engage the past several weeks. So yes, it's true that we have not been able to advance these ceasefire talks, but it's not because of any lack of effort by the United States or our partners in the region. It's because the terrorist organization that Iran has sponsored for years and years and years has refused to come to the table. So if Iran wants to use the breakdown of ceasefire talks as an excuse for its actions today, it needs to point to the terrorist group that it controls. It's Hamas that has been responsible in recent weeks for the breakdown of those talks.
Is it your understanding that that was one of the reasons that they decided to?
No, I was responding to the question.
Yeah. Last one clarification. I mean, obviously these talks require time, resources. It engages top U.S. officials. Are they still a worthwhile investment of the U.S.'s time when it appears that other parties are not?
No, look, we are not going to give up on reaching a ceasefire in Gaza because we believe it is the best way to free the hostages. It is the best way to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people. It is the best way to ensure long-term peace and stability for the entire region. So no, of course we are going to continue to stay engaged on this, but in any kind of ceasefire talks, when you're talking about two parties to a conflict, you need both parties to engage. And right now we have a refusal to engage by one of those parties.
Sorry, that's Gaza and Lebanon as well, or have you abandoned this?
In Lebanon, so look, we ultimately do want to see a ceasefire. We ultimately want to see a diplomatic resolution. But as I said yesterday, we do support Israel's right to defend itself against terrorist organizations. Hezbollah has continued to launch terrorist attacks across the board, and Israel's taking steps to defend itself against those attacks.
Thank you.
And you mentioned there was, before the attack, you weren't told by the Iranians that they were going to attack, but you'd had some indication. What was the indication? Was that sort of from satellites able to see things moving around? Are you able to tell us anything more about that?
So I am not able to tell you anymore, unfortunately. Obviously, you've seen all around the world before the outbreak of conflicts that the United States at times has the ability to gather information about what is likely to happen. That was the case here. I just can't say any more about it. But it was not through any conversations with Iran, direct or indirect.
Some a small amount of intelligence was declassified so that you could make that warning ahead of time.
I'm not able to get into it any more than what we said publicly already.
In that period between informing the world and the Israelis that of this information, was there any effort to, other than the public statements, to reach out to the Iranians to say, don't do this?
So I will answer that by saying we have made clear for some time that we have the ability to send messages to Iran when it is in our interest to do so. And without speaking to any messages in particular, we have made clear the position of the United States that Iran should not launch this attack, that it would be a mistake for Iran to launch this attack, and I think I'll leave it at that.
And I think the Iranian mission to the UN has talked about, they did send some message, I'm not sure whether it's before, minutes before, after the missiles were launched, or is there anything you can tell us about when that was received and sort of the nature of that message?
It wasn't received because that report's not true. I mean, I have seen the statement from Iran. I saw first stories that they warned us in advance, then I saw stories that they warned us shortly in advance. It's just not true. We received no advance warning from Iran about this attack.
Okay, and since the attack...
And sorry to interrupt. Sorry. I would just note that this is not the first time that Iran has said things about supposed interactions with the U.S. government and messages it has sent to the U.S. government that have not been true. They have done that a number of times over the last few months, and this is one of those examples.
You're saying up till now, up till when you took the podium, I guess, there was no sort of diplomatic note from the Iranians explaining their action?
Correct.
Just to follow up on their statement from in the UN, they said that this attack in response to the violations for their sovereignty and also attacks against their nationals. Now, sovereignty, the attack on Ismail Haniya on their territories, do you think this is a legitimate argument for them?
No, of course it's not. If you look at the supposed argument about attacks on their sovereignty, I would say, first of all, that's an event that happened weeks ago, and what's changed in the weeks since then? You've seen the death of the leader of a terrorist organization that Iran sponsors, funds, controls. That's what's changed. And to the extent that any Iranian officials have been killed in the past few days in Lebanon or in Syria, it's because they were meeting with terrorist organizations, meeting with terrorist leaders. And it goes to the point I made a moment ago, which is what you saw Iran to do today was come to the defense of a terrorist organization. I don't think it holds water when you look at all the events of the past few weeks that this event had anything to do with Iran's sovereignty. It has to do with the fact that a number of the terrorist organizations that Iran has set up for years as a way to undermine and attack the state of Israel have been weakened, first over the past few months and then most recently over the past few weeks. It's quite clear that's what they're responding to.
Okay, and one question on Lebanon. I know now everybody is concerned about a wider war, about escalation, but also there are concerns about repercussions in Lebanon. I'm talking about the humanitarian situation, about maybe civil war at some point. So are you talking to the Lebanese? What are your concerns? What are you doing? Are you talking to the LAF? You've been supporting the LAF, and yesterday you were talking about stability and their role in the stability inside within Lebanon. Who are your partners in Lebanon?
So let me speak to first, you kind of mentioned on the way into the question, the humanitarian situation. We are working to address the humanitarian situation in Lebanon. I would note that the United States has been one of the, if not the largest contributor to humanitarian relief for the Lebanese people going back years, and we will continue to work to provide humanitarian support for the Lebanese people. And we are coordinating with our partners in the region, with international organizations about the shape and nature of those relief efforts, even as we speak. When it comes to the political situation in Lebanon, look, Lebanon has been plagued by instability, as I know you know far better than me, for some time. And certainly not the only, but one of the driving factors of Lebanon's instability has been the fact that Hezbollah plays a significant role in the political organization of Lebanon and has held a veto over Lebanon's ability to move forward with a new president, and has held a veto over the security situation of Lebanese civilians. It's because of Hezbollah's refusal to abide with UN Security Council 1701 and actually pull back from the border, that as they were supposed to do, that we're in this situation today. So I think it's too early, obviously, to say how this conflict will shape out in the next few weeks. But what we are going to be working to do is to try to seize this moment and really hope that the Lebanese people can seize this moment against very difficult odds, because there are still a number of Hezbollah fighters who have access to arms and equipment inside Lebanon, but seize this moment to try to establish actual political stability for Lebanon.
Who do you want to do that?
So look, that is ultimately a question for the Lebanese people to answer, not for the United States to answer. But when you see the degradation of Hezbollah inside Lebanon, which has been such a destabilizing force to the country, hopefully, and you can't predict that it's going to happen, but hopefully that's an opportunity for other political actors in Lebanon to step forward. Yeah.
Matt, I mean, in your answer to Matt, and also during this 12 months, you've been always saying that your main goal in this conflict is not for it to spread to a regional war. And I believe now we are maybe one step further from it, a regional war. But do you think that your way of trying to contain it through your diplomatic means, by drawing boundaries and lines to Israel, that if you cross this will escalate into this war or that war, and the Israeli prime ministers keep crossing those lines, keeps escalating in the region, whether it is in Gaza with the Philadelphia corridor or in Lebanon? First, you advised against major operation in Lebanon. It happened. You advised against ground incursions in Lebanon. It happened, and now we reached to this point. Do you think that he's dragging the United States into a regional war, as he was saying that he wants to do that for a long time now?
So let me say a couple things about this. First, it is absolutely true that Israel makes its own decisions about its security and about its path forward in the region. And that's true about Israel, but it's true about every other country in the region. The United States offers its advice, it offers its support, it offers its deterrence capabilities, it offers its diplomatic capabilities to our partners. But ultimately, our partners and our allies have to make their own decisions about their future. And the United States has to make its own decisions about our national interests. And I know that's what the state of Israel does and what they will continue to do. And we will continue to make our own decisions about our national interests. And the decisions that we have made that we will continue to stand by and continue to pursue is to use our diplomacy and deterrence to try and avert a regional war. We're going to continue to do that. But it's always been true that there are a number of other players in the region besides the United States. It's Israel, it's terrorist organizations, there are other countries in the region, all of whom have agency in this question. And what we will continue to do is use our diplomacy, use our deterrence to try to achieve the best outcome possible.
But don't you see that maybe you are enabling the Israelis to seek, what you say, their own interests in their own way of thinking, by risking or going against your interests as the United States of going toward a regional war?
So they are going to make their decisions. We are going to make decisions about our interests. But if you look at the questions that have been before us the past few days and the questions that got us to where we are today, we're here responding to an Iranian attack that we, along with Israel primarily, were able to successfully defeat, that Iran launched because Israel has taken out the leaders of a terrorist organization. And that's something we support them doing. So while there are certainly steps that Israel takes with which we do not agree, and we have been quite clear about that, we do support them taking out the leaders of a terrorist organization. We support them degrading a terrorist organization. Those are steps that the United States would take as well. Those are steps that Arab countries in the region would take. Doesn't mean we always agree with the way that they do it, but we fully recognize their right to do it, and we're going to continue to have conversations with them about the best way forward.
My last question is just, there's some statements coming from Tehran that they waited so long after Hania was assassinated in Tehran because they received messages from the United States that something will happen regarding the ceasefire in Gaza, and this maybe will give them a way of not responding to Israel, and this didn't happen. Did you give them this message?
So we made clear through a number of diplomatic channels. I'm not going to talk about our direct communications with Iran, as I never do, but we did make clear through a number of diplomatic channels that the situation in the region was very tense and that the ceasefire talks were at a very delicate nature, and Iran should not do anything to upset those talks. Now, what's happened in the meantime? Obviously, there's been a lot of water under the bridge since that date, but if you look at what's happened in the past few weeks, it has been Iran's client terrorist organization that has been the impediment to reaching a ceasefire agreement, which is not to say that there have not been times in which Israel has made reaching an agreement more difficult. They absolutely have, and we have been trying to work through those objections as well. But in the past few weeks, it's the terrorist organization that Iran supports that has refused to come to the table to talk about how to get a final agreement. So, Said.
Thank you. You're saying that Hamas has rejected, or Hamas is obstinate about the ceasefire talks. I just want to understand what you're saying.
Yeah, so it is. So to be clear, I went through some of this yesterday, Said, and I know you were out. Everybody's allowed, and no, everybody's allowed a day off. So obviously, this has been a long and winding road trying to get an agreement over the finish line. If you look at the events since the president put forward a public proposal on May 31st, and then later, I think it was in August, where he presented a bridging proposal to both parties that narrowed the differences down to a final few provisions that we were trying to work through. Obviously, there were things where we wanted to see Israel make tough decisions, and there were places we wanted to see Hamas make tough decisions. And we thought we had been making progress on narrowing those differences and having a proposal that would bridge the final differences between the two parties. And then in the past few weeks, Hamas just stopped engaging with the mediators, with Egypt and Qatar. So right now, which is not to say that there aren't, as I said in response to one of the other questions, not to say that Israel, if we can get back on track, doesn't have difficult decisions to make. They will have difficult decisions to make, and we will be pushing them to make those difficult decisions. But right now, and for the past few weeks, it's been Hamas being unwilling to engage in any meaningful way with the mediators that has kept us from moving towards an agreement.
I'm sorry, but a couple of things.
Can we just stop it? Has Israel engaged in a meaningful way?
We have been engaged. We have been engaging. So
they never responded when you guys put forth that proposal for a 21-day ceasefire.
So let's keep things separate. We're talking about the ceasefire proposal in Gaza right now. They have been engaging with us on a meaningful way. I can talk about that when Saeed's and I come back and talk about that about the proposal. We're talking about the proposal in Gaza.
Just to follow up, although Hamas did accept the proposal as was suggested by the president. On May 31. They accepted it.
Just to be clear, before you go on your question, that's not accurate. It's not accurate.
They keep saying we accepted wholly.
I know they didn't. Okay. I can tell you, having looked at the text of the original proposal and looked at the text of the response, they accepted some provisions and proposed changes to others. That's not an acceptance. That is a negotiation.
Yeah, but a couple of things on this point. I mean, you mentioned that Israel has a right to go after terrorist leaders and kill them and so on. Israel has been doing this for decades. They've killed scores of Palestinian leaders, scores of Lebanese leaders and so on over the years. Has that in any way really listened the conflict, resolved the issue, brought peace to the region, arrived at resolution of the conflict?
There is
do you believe do you believe that what Israel is doing now is basically makes it safer?
There has been a long history of violence in the Middle East. Decades and decades of violence. And you have heard the Secretary talk about one of the things we would like to accomplish is to break that cycle of violence and ultimately reach resolutions to establish an independent Palestinian state, which of course is the absence of which fuels much of the insecurity in the region. We would like to see Israel normalize its relationships with its neighbors. But in the meantime, that does not mean that Israel should not defend itself against terrorists that are committed on killing its civilians and destroying its state. Any country would do that.
Okay, let me ask you just shift gears on the aid issue. ProPublica published a report saying that Israel deliberately blocked humanitarian aid to Gaza, and there were 2 U.S. government bodies that told that to the Secretary of State, but he basically rejected it. And in fact, he told Congress that that in fact Israel was allowing aid to go on. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I will, and I'm glad you asked me this question because I think there have been a lot of misperceptions about what happened that I do want to clear up. So it is not at all uncommon when the United States government is looking at difficult questions for different agencies inside the United States government to come to differing conclusions, or different bureaus and components inside an agency to come to differing conclusions. And that's what happened here. You had a number of components of the department that were making recommendations. You had other agencies inside the U.S. government outside the State Department who were providing information to the Secretary. And when the Secretary got all those recommendations, in a number of meaningful ways, that they conflicted. You had some people making one set of recommendations and other people making, if not diametrically opposed recommendations that conflicted. And so that's not an unusual thing. That happens all the time when making difficult decisions. And so what the Secretary did is what we always try to do, which is to sift through those conflicting recommendations, look at the underlying information, and make the best judgments we can. And the judgment that we ultimately made, if you read the National Security Memorandum, and I think a lot of this has been lost by people who have forgotten in the months since it was released what it said, that report was quite clear in identifying that there were a number of steps that Israel had taken or not taken that had led to the hindrance of humanitarian aid being delivered to Gaza, and that we were quite concerned about those steps. But in the meantime, they had implemented a number of additional measures that we had recommended to them to improve the delivery of humanitarian assistance. And it is looking at all of those factors together, where the situation had been and where it had gone, that led the Secretary to come to the conclusion that he made. So it is far more complicated than the kind of headline or tweet version of this situation that I know often gets written up. I will say, the final thing I will say about that is, this is an ongoing situation where we constantly monitor the situation, identify deficiencies, engage with the government of Israel, engage with the UN and humanitarian partners in the region to try to correct those deficiencies, and then move forward. And our assessments, because we're not done making those assessments, will continue.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah, Tom, go. Oh, yes.
Just a specific follow-up on that. You talked about these different parts of the State Department making different recommendations. In the ProPublica story, and I guess we know about this from the NSM, but if you were going to look to parts of the U.S. government to tell you on the specific question of whether a country is blocking the delivery of humanitarian aid, wouldn't you look to USAID and PRM in this building? Aren't they exactly the two parts of the government that you would ask that question?
So I would look to them. I would also look to our experts in the region, our experts in the bureaus that cover the region, as well as other U.S. government agencies. And that's what we did. And without speaking to the recommendation of any individual component, any individual bureau or agency, because it wouldn't be appropriate for me to do that, the Secretary got conflicting recommendations and had to resolve those.
Doesn't it suggest, and isn't the Secretary's decision based on recommendations? He's taken the expert recommendation on that specific humanitarian question and considered it looking at the political and strategic other influences and made a decision. But the actual technical advice from the two agencies involved in that specifically was that they are blocking it.
So this is not a comment about the question, but it is a comment about some of the criticism that the Secretary has received. One of the things that I have found over the years in government is when there are conflicting reports, the side that had the opinion that you agreed with was the expert side, and the other side was a bunch of political hacks. And that is always the way that people interpret these. We look at it as all of these officials who made recommendations had expertise, and the Secretary valued all of their expertise equally, and ultimately took their recommendations, but also dived into the underlying facts and dived into not just looking backwards months and months and months, but what the change in the situation and the change in the delivery of humanitarian assistance when we made that assessment, and found that to be just as important as the events that had happened in the previous months. And the report's language reflected all of that. We were quite transparent about how we had seen the situation change over time.
Wait a second. I don't understand how you can say the secretary valued all their expertise equally when he rejected the side that...
So you can value someone's expertise and still disagree with, I value very much your reporting, Matt. I disagree with some of the stories that you write. You can value someone...
I question that.
You can value someone's expertise and still disagree at times with their recommendations when you have conflicting information. It's just,
wait, so there was conflicting information?
You had conflicting assessments from different bureaus inside the department.
Okay, but assessments were based on facts on the ground, right?
They were based on...
Right?
They were...
What was happening on the ground?
So it's not just...
So unless one of these two bureaus just got it wrong and didn't, then they were giving their...
No. It is,
their assessment was based on the facts.
No,
right?
It is not just an assessment of facts on the ground, but how facts changed over time, which is one of the things we laid out in the report, that if you looked at the actions by the government of Israel, and as important as actions at time inaction, things that we had recommended they do that they didn't take, we concluded that some of the actions they took and some of the inactions, things that they hadn't done, had led to a slowdown in delivery of humanitarian assistance. But we had intervened with them, and they had taken a number of meaningful steps in another direction that led us to make the assessment that we did.
To the point where now everything is just fine.
As I said, it is an ongoing assessment, and we constantly see deficiencies that we try to alleviate. The situation is nowhere close to fine. Yeah.
On the Israeli raids into Lebanon, just first of all, I mean, do you have any updates on your assessment of what's happening in the ground, if these remain limited as has been described?
So as of today, we have continued to see limited targeted raids. I won't speak to the future, but that's what we've seen as of this point.
And I think the Israelis have spoken about these going back some way in time as well, actually. Is that your understanding that they have been... they were going on to well before?
I think with that level of detail, I should, about a military operation, I should defer to them to speak to.
And you talked about this combination of deterrence and diplomacy.
So and you're going to be consulting with the Israelis in terms of the response to Iran. Are both of those things that you're talking about important in your discussions with the Israelis now?
Both deterrence and diplomacy?
Of course, they always are.
Okay. And on the point about... I just want to sort of get you to reflect on where you were at last week at the United Nations, a joint call with a number of countries urging restraint, de-escalation, a 21-day truce. Where we are now and what we've just seen happening in the region, when you reflect on sort of what has changed or what went wrong, if I can put it like that, for your own strategic position, what is the reason behind the complete difference in what you're aspiring to last week and where we're at now?
So nothing has changed in what we're aspiring to. We continue to see a ceasefire and a diplomatic resolution as the best way forward to the conflict in the north. At the same time, events that have happened over the past few weeks, like the death of Hassan Nasrallah, is the kind of event that we support, right? We want to see terrorists brought to justice. And attacks on terrorist infrastructure to both stop them from launching these rocket attacks against Israeli civilians, and, as I said in response to Heba's question, to try to degrade what has been a destabilizing force for Lebanon and the Lebanese people. We support those actions, but long-term, ultimately, we do want to see a diplomatic resolution, and that starts with a ceasefire, and we're continuing to pursue that with Israel and our partners in the region.
All right, we've just been listening there to the U.S. Department of State spokesperson Matthew Miller. Give us the latest update there amid Iran's attacks on Israel. So, of course, staying with this story here on Live Now from Fox, I now want to transition into the Pentagon's comments. Let's listen in right here on Live Now from Fox.
As you're aware, Iran conducted a significant attack against Israel today, launching approximately 200 ballistic missiles targeting several locations in Israel. We condemn these reckless attacks by Iran, and we call on Iran to halt any further attacks, including from its proxy forces. During the attack, the U.S. military coordinated closely with the Israeli Defense Forces to help defend Israel. U.S. Navy destroyers deployed to the Middle East region supported the defense of Israel by firing approximately a dozen interceptors against the incoming Iranian missiles. Initial reports indicate that Israel was able to intercept the majority of incoming missiles and that there was minimal damage on the ground, but I'd refer you to Israel for confirmation, and any questions on that is they're in a better position to discuss. Please note that we're still assessing the attack and the outcome, so numbers may change as we receive updates. Additionally, no U.S. personnel were injured or harmed during the Iranian missile attack. Secretary Austin, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General C.Q. Brown Jr., and U.S. Central Command Commander General Eric Kurilla have been in constant contact with President Biden and Vice President Harris throughout the day to consult on the situation and U.S. actions. In addition to his phone call earlier this morning with Israeli Minister of Defense Gallant prior to the Iranian attack, Secretary Austin spoke to the minister again just a short while ago to get an update. He reaffirmed the United States' ironclad commitment to the defense of Israel and underscored that the U.S. remains well-postured throughout the Middle East region to protect U.S. forces and defend Israel in the face of threats from Iran and Iran-backed terrorist organizations. We'll provide a readout of that call as soon as possible. To be crystal clear, as Secretary Austin has said, should Iran, its partners, or its proxies use this moment to target American personnel or interests in the region, the United States will take every necessary measure to defend our people. And separately, I do have an update to provide on DoD support to Hurricane Helene response efforts, but I'll provide that at the end. With that, I'm happy to take your questions. We'll start with AP. Tara.
Thanks, General Ryder. What Navy destroyers were involved in helping shoot down and intercept? And given this escalation, what's being communicated between Secretary Austin and Minister Gallant right now in terms of tampering things down and potentially avoiding a wider war?
So the two Navy destroyers involved were the USS Bulkley and the USS Cole. In terms of the conversations between Secretary Austin and Minister Gallant, I won't get into the private discussions other than to say we are consulting closely with them on next steps and the continued defense of Israel.
And then, are there any plans underway to conduct a NEO given the increased risk of a wider war?
Right now, there has been no order to evacuate. As you've heard us say before, we are a planning organization, so we, of course, plan for all contingencies. But as of right now, State Department has not called for an evacuation. Jennifer.
Should we assume that the SM-3s were used by the Cole and the Bulkley to shoot down or to intercept the missiles?
I'm not going to get into the specific type of ordnance, Jennifer, other than to say, again, they fired a dozen interceptors.
And Iran said that they gave a heads up to the U.S. and to Russia. How much warning were you given by Iran?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any pre-warning by Iran about their potential attack. As you know, this is something we've been following very closely for a while. Based on the threats of retaliation by Iran. And so we've been closely consulting with Israel for a while now to be prepared in the eventuality. And as today demonstrated, we were prepared and we were able to successfully work alongside Israel to defend them from this attack. Let me go to Carla.
Thanks, Pat. You said that the destroyers shot down Iranian missiles. Where do they come from? Were they all from inside Iran, or was some also from Yemen being shot by the Houthis?
Carla, to my knowledge, and again, we're still assessing this, these were all launched from Iran, ballistic missiles. And what I said was that they fired the interceptors towards those missiles. So.
And then were any other U.S. assets involved in this defense?
Of course, we have a lot of capability in the region, a lot of things that are there to be prepared for a wide variety of threats. But in terms of the launching of these interceptors, it was those two destroyers.
So just being clear, no ground-based interceptors were used in this.
Correct.
Were the were you aware of any duds that didn't fire off, that maybe Iran wanted to fire more than the roughly 200?
As I mentioned, we're still assessing the outcome of the attack, and so we'll have much more information later. But these are all, our initial reports.
And then on the second call with the Secretary and Minister Gallant, did he urge Israel not to respond or to moderate any response to Iran, or did Gallant share any of Israeli intentions for their potential response here?
Well, again, as I'm sure you can appreciate, I'm just not going to be able to get into the details of their call other than to say, again, we're consulting closely about next steps and the continued defense of Israel.
What does Secretary Austin think about the potential for an Israeli response here? Would he urge them, without saying what he said in the call necessarily, but what are his feelings about the potential? Would he urge them restraint or?
Well, look, if you take a step back here, we fully support Israel's right to defend itself. You just saw a very significant ballistic missile attack by Iran against Israel. And so, we'll continue to work alongside them to support their defense. We, of course, do not want to see a wider regional conflict. You've heard us say that many times, and we'll continue to work towards that end. But we also fully understand the fact that this was a significant attack by Iran. And so we're going to continue to consult closely, and we're going to continue to support their defense. Let me go to Laura.
Thank you. Just a couple of clarifications. You say that the U.S. destroyers had intercepted or shot down the missiles, or just that they fired?
I said that they fired approximately a dozen interceptors against the incoming Iranian missiles.
Okay. And were there any U.S. aircraft that shot interceptors at Iranian missiles?
What I've read out is what participated in the defense of Israel. Okay.
And then, sorry, just one more. Can you say if there were any drones or cruise missiles that were involved in the Iranian
Again,
attack?
still assessing it right now. It appears it was ballistic missiles, no drones, but again, we'll continue to assess. Let me go to Joseph, and then we'll come here.
Thank you. Just wanted to turn to the Israeli invasion in Lebanon. For the past couple of months, the department and the secretary have called for de-escalation. You guys have voiced your opposition to any ground incursion, invasions, limited operations. After we found out that the Israeli strike last week killed the Hezbollah chief, Hassan Nasrallah, it seems like the tone changed. From the statements last night, the department and the secretary said they supported what Israel is doing. So what changed for a change in that tone and that stance from the department?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, Joseph, is we fully support Israel's right to defend itself against Hezbollah. As we understand it, they will be conducting limited operations to destroy Hezbollah infrastructure that's arrayed along the border there that could be used to threaten Israeli citizens. And so we're continuing to consult with the Israelis to better understand how they intend to go forward. Obviously, I'd refer you to them to talk or ask questions about details regarding those operations. But we fully understand as part of their overall efforts to return people home that they do need to address those threats that are along the border there. And so all that to say, we will continue to consult with the Israelis and other partners in the region long term about how we can ultimately de-escalate those tensions and get to a ceasefire.
Have they asked for any help from you guys doing whatever it is that they want to do?
No. Yes, sir.
Were the United States surprised by the scale of the Iranian attack on Israel?
Well, look, like I said before, we've been monitoring this for a while. Iran had been very public about its threats to retaliate. And so it's something that we've been monitoring. Certainly, this was a significant attack, probably about twice the size in terms of scope of what we saw earlier. But again, we're still assessing the outcomes of this. And as I highlighted at the top, we certainly condemn this reckless attack, this direct attack against Israel, and we'll continue to support Israel's defense.
Several Israeli media spoke about a response tonight, Israeli response tonight to this attack, including some, not just Iran, some other Middle Eastern countries. Will the United States be assisting the Israelis in their response?
Well, I'm not going to speculate about hypotheticals. I'd refer you to the Israelis to talk about,
I'm asking about, will the Americans help them with their response?
Well, what you're asking me is if they're going to do something, and what I'm saying is I'm not going to speculate about what or if they may do. As I highlighted to several of your colleagues, we're consulting closely with the Israelis in terms of next steps, with the emphasis being the defense of Israel. So let me go to this side of the room. Oren.
Essentially a follow-up to that question, is the U.S. willing to strike Iran in response to this? Are you putting that on or off the table?
Well, look, Arnett, again, I don't want to get into hypotheticals. I think I was very clear at the top that should U.S. forces be targeted by Iran or its proxies, we'll take necessary steps to defend our people. And I think we've also been very clear that we're going to support the defense of Israel. And so I'm not going to get into theoretical or speculative operations at this stage, other than to say, we mean what we say and we say what we mean.
And then a follow-up question. Iran claims to have used a new Fatah missile, which is supposed to be a hypersonic ballistic missile. Can you assess whether they did use new and advanced weaponry in this attack and whether they learned from the April attack?
Again, we're still assessing the attack and the outcomes, and so we may have more to provide later, but I don't have anything on that right now. Dan.
Thanks for your time. Two questions, please. On Secretary Austin's statement last night, he referred to being supportive of operations along the border. Is he open to Israel using operations on both sides of the border? Along the border was a little vague there.
Well, I think I'd go back to how I responded to Joseph, right? We understand and support Israel's right to defend itself against Hezbollah, as we highlighted in the readout. We understand that part of that is dismantling some of the attack infrastructure that Hezbollah has built along the border. Certainly, again, we don't want to see this, broaden into a wider regional conflict, but we understand, again, that what Israel is doing are limited operations to destroy that attack infrastructure and then enable citizens on both sides of the border to return home. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we do think that a diplomatic resolution is the only way to achieve lasting stability and security across the Israel-Lebanon border. So, we're going to continue to work to that end. But we also, again, understand Israel's need to defend itself.
And then a follow. The State Department read out a report on an attack on a diplomatic facility at Baghdad Airport last night. Have you seen any other attacks on U.S. forces, I guess, since Friday? This one would seem to be on a diplomatic facility, but be it in the last day, particularly at this heightened time of tension, or just broadly over the last couple of days?
Yeah, as of right now, I'm not aware of any additional attacks. Thanks. Sir.
The Iron Dome, how effective is it against ballistic missiles? And some of the televised images appeared to show some of them landing on infrastructure. Are you aware of that? In general, was this attack more effective than the Iranian attack in April?
Again, understanding that a lot is still very initial. As I highlighted, initial indications are that there was minimal damage on the ground. In terms of the specifics, though, I'd have to refer you to Israel really to talk through that. And again, as more information comes in, we'll certainly know more. But the initial assessment is that Israel was able to successfully defend itself, of course, with the support from the U.S. And so, again, we may have more later on that. Helene?
Thanks, Pat. I just want to be clear because it seems like we're at a very dangerous time where any kind of ambiguity from the U.S. could lead to an attack on American troops. And when you say I understand when you say that we're going to defend any attack at American troops. I also understand that that you said that no American troops were hurt. Therefore, are you saying the U.S. is not planning on a kinetic strike against Iran? Because right now, when you say there will be consequences, all of that, you're leaving it vague and people don't understand. And I want to understand, are we going to be joining Israel in hitting back against Iran in a kinetic manner?
Yeah, so with all due respect, you're talking about a hypothetical future, right, and presupposing what Israel may or may not do. So I'm just not going to talk about...
But you said there will be consequences, and Jake Sullivan said there will be consequences. So
right,
what does
and
that
I think
mean?
Broadly speaking, the U.S. has been clear that there will be security, economic consequences should Iran attack, but I just don't have anything to preview specifically as it relates to that. All right. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Pat. Just to clarify, did any U.S. aircraft track any of the missiles either before the launch or during the attack, even if they weren't involved kinetically in the defense of Israel?
So I won't go into specifics, Chris, other than to say, as you well know, we have a wide variety of ISR capabilities throughout the region to monitor and track potential aerial threats, to include aircraft that do that. So I'll just leave it there. Okay. Charlie.
Thank you, General. I know you said repeatedly that Iran doesn't telegraph these attacks, yet from early this morning, we were told that an attack would be imminent. So we're getting some sort of information from somewhere. Based on whatever that was based on, where does Iran stand now? Is this just the first salvo? From your assessment, are they positioned to go ahead and pull the trigger again at will?
I mean, that's really a question for Iran. As evidenced by this attack, they certainly maintain the capability to conduct additional attacks. As I highlighted at the top, we call on them to halt any further attacks, we'll continue to assess. We'll also continue to be prepared to respond in the defense of Israel should they opt to do another one. We certainly hope that they do not, but we obviously have to be prepared in that eventuality.
I just want to clarify, I think you said earlier this is twice the size and scope from the attack of April 13th?
Yeah, it's about twice as large in terms of the number of ballistic missiles that they launched from the last.
Do you believe it was their intent to actually do damage this time?
Well, look, you don't launch that many missiles at a target without the intent of hitting something. So absolutely, just like the last time, their intent is to cause destruction. Fortunately, Israel has very significant air defense capabilities, and the U.S., of course, played a role in helping on that front as well.
All right, we were just listening in there as the Pentagon gave the latest update there on the latest with the Israel and Iran situation. I do want to reset for you as we are now in a new hour, 1 o'clock here on the West Coast, 4 o'clock there on the East Coast. So if you are just now joining our broadcast and you weren't aware of what happened earlier today as we take a live look there over Tel Aviv, Iran says it fires dozens of missiles into Israel, which is another sharp escalation of this months-long conflict between Israel and Iran-backed militias Hezbollah and Hamas. Israel and the United States have now warned that there will be severe consequences in the event of an attack. Both President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris closely monitored the developments there in the Middle East from the White House Situation Room. So several updates have come in over the last few hours. Israeli officials have officially said that there have been no reported deaths there in Israel, and reports of the death of a Palestinian civilian in Jericho are being tracked. So at this point, we're continuing to get these live updates. But I want to now bring into the conversation another part of this conversation is Behnam Ben Talblou. He's for the Foundation of Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. I have to first start. We got the notification earlier on this morning and early afternoon that Iran had attacked Israel. What were your initial thoughts as you heard that news come through?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. Initially, I have to say, when you were comparing that bit of news to the past 2 or 3 weeks of what was going on in the Middle East, the Islamic Republic had essentially a proxy network that it had set up around Israel called a Ring of Fire, dismantled or defanged through a series of bold and escalatory Israeli military strikes against Lebanon, particularly against Hezbollah, where that is the crown jewel of Iran's terrorist in the region. And the conventional wisdom was that the regime would not respond because it would pave the pathway for a stronger and harsher Israeli military response to the patron of Hezbollah, which is the government of the Islamic Republic itself. But it seems that that is now come and gone, and the Islamic Republic has literally doubled the ballistic missile barrage that it had sent towards Israel in April. At that time, there was between 100 and 120 ballistic missiles fired at Israel. That marked a historic first in the otherwise shadow war between Iran and Israel, where the Islamic Republic stepped out from the shadows and launched conventional projectiles publicly and overtly from its own territory. It has now done so again. I certainly think an Israeli military response is coming, and it's highly likely that it'll be public, unlike the last one, which the Israelis did not take credit for, and that happened on April 19th. So in short, the Islamic Republic clearly felt the need to rebuild its deterrence, and the Islamic Republic clearly felt undeterred by that which may come, either from the U.S. or from Israel, And that speaks to a much larger problem and shortcoming that exists in U.S. policy right now, which is noticeably absent as Israel and Iran are locking horns.
Absolutely. We just heard there from that update with the Pentagon. They were saying that this attack was twice in size, larger than the one that happened earlier this year in April. Can you sort of speak to why Iran decided to kick up the notches and where this sort of goes from here with them escalating in these attacks?
Well, here, sometimes the simplest explanation can be the most likely. And if 100 wasn't enough the last go around, then perhaps 200. And indeed, military operations, no matter how limited or no matter how wide, are learning opportunities for both sides. And the Islamic Republic learned quite a bit about Israel's layered air and missile defenses, as well as the capabilities of America, the Europeans, and America's partners in the heartland of the Arab Middle East that were critical to that interception mission. And the Islamic Republic was likely looking to overwhelm some of these capabilities. And that's where the old saying comes in, where quantity has a quality of its own. So if 100 wasn't sufficient, then perhaps 200. You have seen some videos of missile bodies falling in Israel. You've seen videos on social media of fuselages falling short of that. There are warheads separating, coming down over Israeli territory. Thankfully, a lot of the grandiose and hyperbolic claims made in Iranian media can even be disproven by a few simple social media searches about, again, the very limited military efficacy of this strike. I wouldn't call it a political flop, but it certainly was a handicapped move. And this is the Islamic Republic learning and fighting as it always does, which is death by 1,000 cuts.
And it's very interesting that you brought that up because, of course, Iran also spoke out and said that they did send pre-warning to the U.S. and Israel. But as we were listening to these U.S. officials, they said there was no warning sent to them from Iran. This was their intelligence telling them that this attack was imminent. What do you think about this? And why is Iran putting out certain statements on social media and even through their official channels in their media to talk about what happened here today?
Well, even one further than that, you've had some Western outlets amplify those comments and claims on social media, talking about, in essence, an Iranian heads up or a warning about the nature and the scale and the scope of the military action. And here I have to say it's critical that when you compare the lead time that the Islamic Republic gave the world last go around, which was about I think 10 days, 10 or 12 days. The Islamic Republic gave, even if you believe those stories, about 2 to 4 hours. So it's a drastically limited lead.
Sorry about that. We seem to have lost sound there. Or it froze. No, it's not frozen, but there's no sound.
Let's just be blunt. Don't buy Microsoft. Don't buy Amazon.
don't buy NVIDIA, don't buy Bitcoin, don't buy any of the fancy AI stocks you read about in the Wall Street Journal. You make money by
killing, it appears, a single Israeli, but simply to save face and to try to change the conversation. One thing we don't know is why exactly he did it, why he felt he had to take this risk, knowing Israel would probably retaliate massively. What kind of pressures are there inside of that regime, inside of the Iranian Ring of Fire, inside of the axis of resistance, on the streets in Tehran? What kind of pressures is he under and feeling that he has to respond to?
No, that's a very good point. And of course, the minimal damage, and it was successfully defended, Israel was today. I do want to ask you, because you mentioned it, the big question, why? But also, why now? We're less than a week until October 7th, the anniversary of that first initial Hamas attack. Is there anything in your eyes related to the timeline that we can point to? Is this significant at all?
In terms of what the Iranians did today, I don't think so. What's significant for them is what's behind us, particularly the last 2 weeks and the absolute degradation and dismantling of, again, something that has been an Iranian project for 40 years to build up Hezbollah as a second strike capability that would be able to rain down hell on Israel in the event of an attack on Iran. It was their insurance policy protecting them, giving them immunity from an attack by Israel or the United States. And Hezbollah, over 2 weeks, only a fortnight, is being systematically dismantled in front of their eyes. And I think they just desperately feel that they had to do something here to kind of change the equation.
No.
Okay, so they're pretty much talking about the same thing we've already heard. So I wanted to also go in because I found something on Nancy Grace, Crime Stories with Nancy Grace. She posted a video of Sean Diddy Combs. This is the 11th accuser that talks and speaks out. Let's take a look at that.
Years old at the time of the alleged incident that she is suing Combs over. She was dating an employee at Bad Boy Records who worked directly under Combs. And her only real connection to Combs was her boyfriend's job, but she apparently was very involved in his employment, and Combs specifically asked to meet with her about her boyfriend's employment. She was very focused on making sure that he did well at this job and was able to climb up the ladder at Bad Boy Records. That's who Thalia Graves is.
She is also one of the latest alleged victims of Sean. Governor Sydney, who is Thalia?
Nancy, Thalia Graves was 25 years old at the time of the alleged incident that she is suing Combs over. She was dating an employee at Bad Boy Records who worked directly under Combs. And her only real connection to Combs was her boyfriend's job, but she apparently was very involved in his employment, and Combs specifically asked to meet with her about her boyfriend's employment. She was very focused on making sure that he did well at this job and was able to climb up the ladder at Bad Boy Records. That's who Thalia Graves is.
She is also one of the latest alleged victims of Sean Combs. Now, keep in mind what Sydney Sumner just told you, that she was called to meet with Combs, according to her, about her boyfriend's job. Now, what do you think she would do to safeguard the boyfriend's job? Listen.
The internal pain after being sexually assaulted has been incredibly deep and hard to put into words. It goes beyond just physical harm caused by and during the assault.
I've dealt with a lot of victims. she, Thalia, in my mind, is telling the truth. Joining me now, a veteran trial lawyer who has defended drug lords, you name it, Renee Rockwell. You can find her on Facebook, renee.rockwell. Renee, thank you for being with us. You have dealt with many victims. You, on the defense side, defending their attackers, alleged attackers. Me, on the other side, representing the crime victim. It's a defense attorney's worst nightmare when the victim takes the stand and comes across as genuinely as Thalia Graves does.
Nancy, but she's involved in a lawsuit. And I've always felt like a lawsuit, when you're suing somebody, cheapens your position because now it's about the money. And secondly, do you think that Combs cares about all these lawsuits that are filed against him? He wants to get out of jail, and he should be out of jail. He's not guilty yet, and he was going to turn himself in, and now he's sitting in a jail. Where's the presumption of innocence, Nancy?
Got a question for you, Miss Rockwell. What should I do right now? Send you the keys to the Fulton County Jail where all your clients are awaiting trial? HELLNO. He should not be out of jail. Unlike your clients, he has the wherewithal to hop right over to Teterboro and leave the country. He doesn't need a passport to get on that plane. And I guarantee you that there are plenty of countries across this world, France for one, who's hiding out Roman Polanski and more, would be happy to have him spending his money there. So are you telling me that you believe every defendant charged in a federal lawsuit, a federal criminal charge, should get bond?
Amazon hates this, but there's nothing they can do to stop it. There's a new electric lighter out there, and it's got the firepower of a military-grade flamethrower. It's already been banned from...
Nancy, he hired an attorney. He was planning on turning himself in, and they grabbed him ahead of time. Now, I'll tell clients...
Who cares?
...warrants against him to beat them to the jail. When you turn in, that's the first thing you can tell the magistrate. He turned himself in. What they did was the SWAT team grabbed him before he could get there. I just have a problem with pre-trial detention when you're innocent until proven guilty.
Okay, you know what? I asked you one question. You gave me a different answer. You avoided it. That's okay. You're just arguing he got in jail too soon, because there is no way that two judges, Taranowski and Carter, are going to turn down his bond based on the fact that he was arrested and didn't turn himself in. But I give you credit for trying to say, look at this, not at that. It might work with other people. It does not work with me. And I want to go back to, actually, she said something very valuable. And that is, once you file a civil lawsuit, does that make me not believe her? No, I think she should file a civil lawsuit. But a good defense attorney like Rockwell will take that innocent fact and twist it around and contort it and fire it back at her on cross-examination. Along the lines of, isn't it true you filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Mr. Combs? Isn't that true? And she'll have to say yes. And then they'll say, so you want this jury to believe that you're only coming forward because you were, not because you want the money? And then she'll have to say and explain herself to the jury. Is it true? No. Will it happen in court? Absolutely. You be the judge. You listen to Thalia Graves. Listen.
Some of the hardest parts of this pain are the shame and the guilt I have experienced that plays a negative part in my day-to-day ability to function properly. Being blamed, questioned, and threatened has often made me feel worthless, isolated, and sometimes responsible for what happened to me.
to Dr. Bethany Marshall, renowned psychoanalyst, joining us out of Beverly Hills, author of A Deal Breaker. You can also see her on Peacock. Dr. Bethany Marshall, when I hear what that victim says, it's so upsetting. And she said it all. I'm glad she's got Gloria Allred by her side. I know a lot of people, mock Allred and make fun of Allred. They're just jealous. She's an incredible lawyer, and she stands by her client through hell and high water. But she says, the shame and guilt I have experienced plays a negative part in my life every day. And I have found that to be true with not only victims, but adult victims of children. Even after all those years, Bethany, they're still hounded, haunted by what happened to them as a child, and that feeling of helplessness. I can't stress that enough. You get over the cuts, the bruises, the abrasions of a rape or a sin, and you go forward with that, you heal. But up here, I don't know that you ever heal, Bethany.
Nancy, you never heal. And let's just be clear about what happened to her. She was served a drink with drugs in it. She was brought into a studio. When she came to, Sean Puffy Combs allegedly was bashing her head against a pool table. She woke up again to being raped by him and his bodyguard, and then once again being forced to perform. So let's just contextualize my comments, and that is that she's definitely experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, and the cognitive component is self-blame, intrusive thoughts that one is to blame for the crime that occurred, for the assault that occurred. But Nancy, there are other symptoms. Avoidance is one of the most prominent symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. In this case, it would be avoidance of anything that would remind her of the original trauma. So she, for instance, she may not be able to date because if a man flirts with her, she's going to be going into a flashback and then confusing that with the original trauma because the brain evens out past and present. Anything in the present that is reminiscent of the original trauma is felt to be identical. So let's say she gets in a great relationship, she's about to have sex or to be intimate, and all of a sudden she goes into a flashback and experiences herself as about to be. So this is disrupting her
Bethany,
relationships.
I've got an example that I want to give you.
Okay.
I had a very close colleague when I was criminal prosecutor, violent crime prosecutor. And when I had any legal issue, I would go to her. Brilliant mind. Happily married, well into her marriage, she suddenly had a flashback of being by a family member as a child. Can I tell you that was the beginning of the end of her marriage? All those years later. It happens.
That's right.
It happens. And people may not believe it, but I know her like the back of my hand. And I remember when it happened. And
Nancy, I had a patient
it was
for many
so
years.
vivid and so upsetting. She couldn't eat for days.
Yeah, because she had that intrusive memory. She had no idea that it happened until it went through her mind. Nancy, I saw a patient for many years who was repeatedly assaulted as a child, and she finally found a great relationship with a wonderful man, but she couldn't be sexually intimate because when he was about to, make love to her, she would actually experience it as if she was being.
Quickest way to relieve neuropathy. These are 3
I'm sorry, I was sitting here. I didn't know I had myself muted. The situation, if you're just joining in, or you've been here a little bit but need to know what's going on, and you can go back and look at that press conference. The situation surrounding Sean Diddy Combs is shocking on multiple levels, with 120 accusers now having come forward. The allegations of sexual misconduct against the music module are staggering, according to reports. Fox reports 60 of the alleged victims are men and 60 are female, with 25 minors involved and some as young as 9 years old. That is sick and disgusting. These accusations paint a devastating picture of systematic abuse, with Combs facing serious charges, as you know, as sex trafficking, racketeering, conspiracy, and interstate transportation for prostitution. Now, federal prosecutors describe Combs as the head of a criminal enterprise subjecting victims to repeated physical and sexual abuse. While Combs has categorically denied these allegations, calling them false and defamatory, and has vowed to prove his innocence in court, the sheer scale of the accusations could dismantle his career and freedom. The claims stretch over years, threatening to bring his entertainment empire crashing down as the public and legal systems grapple with the gravity of these alleged crimes. It's a grim and unsettling development that raises larger questions about power, accountability, and justice in the entertainment industry. And that was taken from Fox News website. And also the other news that we've been watching here earlier is Iran. Israel is under attack after Iran launched a barrage of nearly 200 ballistic missiles, targeting multiple locations across the country. Sirens have been sounding in major cities like Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, with Israel citizens urged to seek shelter immediately. Israel Defense System, alongside U.S. Navy support, intercepted many of the incoming missiles, minimizing casualties. This escalation follows recent Israel strikes on the Iranian and Hezbollah leaders, prompting Iran's retaliatory attack. Israel's defense force remains on high alert, and both nations are preparing for possible further confrontation. The U.S. has pledged support for Israel, warning Iran of severe consequences. I'm hoping that we're not getting into another war with Iran. We don't need any more wars, really. What is going on? I mean, this 2024 has been crazy. Just crazy. Well, I'll try and keep you updated on the situation in Iran. The situation in Israel with Iran and Hezbollah. And also on the Combs case. So if you like this video, hit that like button to help get it out into the YouTube world. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can know when I get updated videos. Again, thank you very much for stopping in tonight, and I appreciate it. Oh, and also, now you can follow my Facebook page over on at Speak Your Mind Radio. Due to, you have to have 100 followers in order to be able to go live. They don't like to go use that platform most of the times instead of YouTube. I would upload the videos anyways. But yeah, and that's it's facebook.com/SYN Radio, and you can either follow or like the page. All right. So till the next video, I'll see you then. Have a great day. God bless and stay safe.